Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me. Today I want to take a closer look at master plans, and perhaps just to kick us off, Gary, I thought we'd think about the Canada Water master plan and some of the proposals there. Can you just give us a flavour of what's going on there?
I can do. I think just to set the scene, Rotherhithe is a very interesting part of London, currently Zone 2, Southeast London, SE16. History of former docklands. It was redeveloped at the decline of the working docks in the 80s by the London Dockland Development Corporation as a very much suburban in flavor residential area, actually never thought of as something being fairly central in London. Over time that's changed in terms of connection, the Jubilee Line, connections to Canary Wharf, the city. This has become a very desirable place to live, so London Docklands Development did a very good job of that. However, it's not seen its full potential exploited. So at the moment, there's a demand for housing, as we know, across London, and this area is set to provide at least 3,500 additional housing units of various tenures, including affordable housing, which is much needed. And the master plan, which is being brought forward by British Land as a part of that over across a 65-acre site of mixed land use, including a reprovision of what is now currently an out-of-town shopping center dominated by a large food shop and some other ancillary retail uses. So it'd be reproviding an urban context, sort of a core. So this is looking at developing a town center with those sorts of uses, shops, office, and people living, some leisure use as well, and taking advantage of kind of the leftover heritage of the docklands. So we have things like Canada Water Basin, which is a third of the original dock, Greenland Dock, and connectivities to the river. The area proposes to improve or enhance transport. There are proposals for a river crossing, which is much needed. It would be cycle and walking crossing to Canary Wharf, which would help take some of the demand off of what's already an overburdened tube service on the Jubilee Line. It's served by the overground as well. So the master plan is a 20-year vision, setting out various ways to improve that, making this a very livable part of London, seen as central London, and building upon kind of what is the important heritage of this has been a very leafy green suburban, and how do you transition into a more urban context.
Thanks, Gary. I think it's a really interesting part of London. I know this was just an area of London described in Southwark, which is the planning authority area, in their local plan, a suburban north for some time. So quite a radical transformation ahead. But again, as you say, kind of looking back also to the historic and heritage aspects in how that future vision is realised. Margot, perhaps you could just talk to us more broadly about your experience of developing master plans.
Sure. Well, I think particularly with a master plan like this that's scheduled to be delivered over 20 years, one of the most important things is to really understand what is fixed and what is flexible. I mean, obviously in the master plan, we've established a vision for the site that's going to be fairly consistent over the 20 years it takes to deliver the development, and that won't change. But what will change is how we deliver it, potentially. Because over 20 years, the real estate market is going to change. There's going to be innovations in technology that will change the way we deliver infrastructure, and also the way people live is bound to change. I mean, look at how the way we live has changed over the last 20 years. Certainly over the next 20 years, there will be additional changes. And the good news is we know how to accommodate that with design, which is great. But I think the one piece of advice I would give to the development managers that are kind of responsible for shepherding this design over the next 20 years and making sure the master plan is delivered to the vision is when they're presented with changes and requests for modifications to the master plan, which they inevitably will be, it's making sure those changes actually follow the vision of the master plan. And if they don't, being bold enough to say, actually, we shouldn't make them unless they're significant enough to warrant redoing the master plan and really taking them on board properly.
Yeah, so that central vision, absolutely important to what happens on the ground and clinging on to that, as you say, along the master plan period. But I suppose before we've even got to that point of defining the vision, there's a bit of a journey in terms of the process of creating that master plan, getting the right stakeholders around the table, managing the expectations of the community, for example. Jamie, perhaps we'll go to you. What are some of the issues and the complexities in this sort of scale of project?
Well, you mentioned the community. That should be at the very heart of the whole process, particularly when you have an area such as this, which has a slightly different history to what is proposed for the future. And there is going to be, as Gary said, a transition. And the community that are in the surrounding area should be at the heart of that process. So early community engagement is absolutely critical in the master planning process itself. But then moving forward, when you look at assembling a site of this nature, you've generally got ownership issues, and I think it's slightly different in this case with British Land owning possibly all of the site. Is that right? Or the majority of it?
Yes, they have control over it in
Yeah.
part, and of course Southwark is a landowner as well.
Indeed. So you have ownership issues certainly on these sites, and it's ensuring that you're able to use the necessary powers at the right time to deal with those, and control, as Gary says, is one of the key issues. So you might need to exercise CPO powers at various stages. That has to be built into your programme. And also flexibility. We keep talking about this, Margot mentioned it again. When you do get to the stage of having a Section 106 agreement and you're talking about civil liabilities, you have to be absolutely certain that you have sufficient flexibility built into your agreement such that you don't stifle the deliverability of the scheme long term. If you're talking about 20 years, you can have a very complex phasing arrangement, for example, and the V word, viability, is going to come into the equation right from the very start. Changes in economic conditions over a 20-year period could be quite drastic, particularly given what's on the horizon for this country. So you need to ensure that the viability position is sensible and robust, and that all parties are working together to get something that ultimately is deliverable.
Yeah, so fixing to that vision, but flexibility in terms of the delivery. That's what I'm hearing. Margot, would you like to add anything else from your just general experience, perhaps looking beyond the UK particularly?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it comes back to working together as a multidisciplinary team, in a workshop environment, all together in the same room. And again, that might sound quite bold, particularly working internationally, because it means we have to fly all around the world to really be in the same room with people. But unless we do that, we're not actually having the right discussions, and we're not actually unpicking the design as well as we could be. And getting it right from the beginning is so critical, because if you want your master plan to be robust and flexible enough to accommodate changes in the market and changes in technology, it means we have to get things like mega infrastructure into the right position. If we're designing a new high-speed rail line, for example, we have to make sure that's in the right place. If it's not, we might end up putting new development where we want to put infrastructure in the future. So strategic planning from the beginning is so important, and getting the right people involved is the only way to actually make it happen.
Gary, I'll turn to you for a final word. I know that this is a context that you're very familiar with.
I am very familiar with it. I think it is important, and the points we've touched on about flexibility and early engagement. There is an existing community here that has experienced this before over a period of time since the 80s and the closing of the dock. So they're quite familiar with how a plan needs to change over time and be flexible. And in reflecting that, British Land has gone back and taken on some of the consultation responses from the local community and organizations like Canada Water Forum to impact and change in terms of how this plan will evolve. So they'll be coming back hopefully shortly to actually consult again with local groups in terms of those responses to those consultation inputs. So again, that is a way that we see plans strategically evolve and how they can actually, in a way, be future-proof. I mean, we can't predict the future. Certainly, none of us sitting around here knows what's going to happen in 2 years' time and those impacts on it. But a plan has to be able to respond to that and take the community along with it.
Okay, thank you.